This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Well, good evening and welcome to the program. Lots and lots to get through tonight, so let's get straight into it. Coming up, Joe Biden piggybacks Democrat victories across a series of state and local elections. But will it be enough to reverse the president's horrific polling numbers? We'll break those down in a bit. Also tonight, trial lawyer Robert Barnes joins me to discuss a New York judge's Get Trump campaign. Will it work? Plus, what is happening here?
We are human beings.
I didn't mean to say I wanted to eliminate Israel. Democrats get themselves in a muddle over whether or not to condemn one of their own who called for the elimination of the Jewish state. But first, let's take a trip to the loony bin that is Washington, D.C. right now and see what's happening up on Capitol Hill, shall we? Now, what a scene. Before we even get in the building, we're passing by this crowd of congressional staffers calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Tell you what, the masks sure are a nice touch, aren't they? But then we go into the building where the real action, my friends, is taking place. Let's go to a congressional hearing with U.S. Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, who's also traveled up the Hill to defend what, well, anyone who spends time watching this program will say is the indefensible. That is to say, the situation at the U.S. southern border, which is seeing 2 or 3 million people a year just waltz into the United States from God knows where. Here's a few of them on the road somewhere in Central America giving thanks to the man who essentially invited them in.
Biden! 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 Biden!
But according to Mayorkas, everything is fine.
So the situation at the border, you're saying, is not a disaster?
That is correct.
America certainly doesn't need a wall.
Do you believe that a border wall is part of the answer? Yes or no?
No.
No.
And don't worry, there's certainly no threat of terrorists sneaking in, though as we covered last week, there absolutely is.
Do you think that millions of people crossing our border illegally creates the risk of a terrorist attack in our country?
Senator, I think that the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security do an extraordinary job of ensuring the safety and security of the
That wasn't the question I asked. I said, do you think that millions of people crossing our border illegally every year, 2.5 million last year, creates the risk of a terrorist? With what's going on in the world, people coming from more than 100 different countries crossing here illegally, you don't even know how many of them are still here. You came here today without that information. Do you think that creates a risk of a terrorist attack in our country?
Senator, you mischaracterized my testimony.
Yes or no? Do you think that creates millions of people come here, are here illegally? We're not even talking about the gotaways. How many gotaways are in our country here illegally? Does that create the risk of a terrorist attack in our country?
And hell, it turns out the guy doesn't even know how many illegals are in the U.S.
Secretary Mayorkas, how many people have entered the country illegally across our southern border since the Biden administration took office? A number.
Senator, it's over 6 million encounters at our southern border.
And how many of those 6 million are still in the country?
Senator, I can get you that information.
So do you know?
Senator, I don't want to.
Would you provide us with a number of how many of those 6 million that crossed our border illegally are still in the country?
I would be pleased to provide you with any data that you request.
And who better to bring some clarity to all of this than our friend John Kennedy from Louisiana, who wasn't having a bar of it.
It's my time, Madam Chair, and I'm going to use it the way I want.
Your time is expired.
Here's well, you let others go on. Here's what I think, Mr. Secretary. I think you're a smart guy. Now, there are only one or two things going on here. Either you're not qualified to manage a Costco food court, or you believe in open borders. And I think it's the
Senator
latter.
Kennedy, your time has expired. Thank you.
I would just say the following two things. Number one, you're 0 for 2 on that. You're inaccurate in both respects, number one. And I'd like the record to reflect that 60 minutes is not 45 minutes, because I can't seem to answer a question without being interrupted. I just wanted to make that comment.
Ah, yes, another wonderful day for America's public servants, standing up for America's interests. Let's dive straight into it now. Joining me now is political journalist John Fund. John, thanks so much for joining us on the U.S. Report. And Joe Biden is going to be wanting to use some momentum from the Democrats' strong election night results this week to turn things around for himself. But talk us through what's going on here, because polling numbers aren't in his favor. According to a New York Times Siena poll, President Biden is trailing Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states, suffering from enormous doubts about his age and deep dissatisfaction over his handling of the economy and the direction of the economy. John, talk us through what happened. Where did Democrats have a good night this week? And does any of that at all help Joe Biden?
In Kentucky, the Democratic governor was able to convince voters that he was a moderate. Incumbents always have an advantage, and he won 52% of the vote. In Virginia, the Democrats outspent the Republicans, enormous union money, and they had some support from moderate pro-choice Republicans on the issue of abortion, and they got just over 50% of the vote and 51% of the legislative seats, and that's enough for a majority. There were other places where they didn't do as well. So Democrats individually around the country did well on Tuesday in most cases, but that completely separate issue is what President Biden does with that, because the same voters who often voted for Democrats tell people in the poll that you just cited they don't want Biden. 71% of voters in that poll said Biden is too old to be president. 62% said he was not mentally alert. And 51% of Democrats agreed with that. A majority of Democrats do not believe he should be their nominee or their president.
I want to play a little grab from this panel of ABC panelists here talking about this. Have a listen. I want to get your reaction.
This is probably going to lead to a lot of Democrats increasing the chatter that Joe Biden should step aside and make room for another Democrat.
And I think the problem that Democrats have is they don't know who that Democrat would be right now.
Is this another nail in the coffin of Joe Biden's hopes to be even on the ticket next November? And if so, John Fund, who do you think could plausibly step in and take that role?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that if Joe Biden had not picked Kamala Harris as his vice president, the talk about removing Biden wouldn't be talk. He would have already been removed. A delegation would have gone up to the White House and said, you know, here's your gold watch, time to go home. But Kamala Harris fares even worse against Republicans if she's the Democratic nominee in polls. Therefore, the Democrats have a problem. What is it in The Sound of Music? There's a song saying, what do you do about a problem called Maria? What do you do about a problem called Kamala? And if they can find a way to ease her out or think they can beat her in the primaries or have the delegates override her candidacy at the convention, they'll do it. I believe the Democrats will not go to someone like Governor Gavin Newsom, a boring white male. They'll probably go to someone, if they don't have Kamala, that will placate some of the constituencies in their party. Remember, 63% of Democrats who vote in primaries are either women or minorities. Therefore, I think Governor Gretchen Whitmer is probably the sweet spot. She's from a swing state, Michigan. She's been elected twice. She's a woman, and she's very combative, and certainly not old.
And John, walk us through this here, because we've talked a couple of times on this program before with various guests about how this could work and how superdelegates at that Democrat convention in, I think, August, could at that late hour decide to make a change. Would Democrats accept that if it had that sort of smoke-filled room kind of feel of, well, we've all voted, but no, here's your person?
Well, if the alternative is to lose power or have Joe Biden potentially fall and not get up or completely be a disaster in the various 3 debates that he has to have with Republican candidates, then I think they'll do anything. Remember, the Democratic Party has shown consistently that it will erase every rule, it will blur every distinction, it will change every narrative in order to secure and keep power. Republicans, to some extent, the same. So whatever is necessary, they will do if they believe that Biden is more of a risk than a benefit to them.
Sure, John. And, you know, one of the interesting things that you mentioned there, and I want to pick up on this too, is this question of minority voters and identity politics. We're seeing now a bit of a shift of minority voters to Trump, to the Republican column, at least in the presidential polls. Some people on the left are really starting to panic about this. Have a listen to these guys on CNN.
From women to Hispanic voters, black voters, 22% of black voters behind Trump. That is not seen in the modern era for a Republican frontrunner, right? I mean, wow.
It's startling.
Now, John, if you take a state like, let's say, Illinois, and which has a Chicago with a large minority population, if even part of that starts to swing Republican, that whole state could wind up going back in the Republican camp, couldn't it?
Well, in theory, yes, but in reality, in almost all cases, that kind of high Republican vote among minorities would slip some when people finally show up at the polls. So I think it would put a state like Michigan, Wisconsin in competition, probably not Illinois. Not to mention the fact that Chicago, shall we say, has a way of adding and subtracting votes that seem to benefit Democrats on the side. I believe that Trump's support among minority voters is certainly higher than the traditional Republican. And one of the reasons for that is not so much that they are becoming Republicans, but they're completely disenchanted with the Democrats who they feel take them for granted. So remember, there are 2 factors with the minority vote. First is people can always stay home because they just don't like either candidate. And many minority voters feel politics has nothing to do with them anymore. Well, that subtracts from the Democrats because that normally would be a traditional support base for them. And the second thing is a lot of black men under the age of 35 basically are very entrepreneurial. They believe that they want to get ahead. They were getting ahead under Trump. They're not getting ahead under Biden. Personal wage growth has slipped dramatically. Price of everything is up, and they're willing to listen. Less so with black women, but even so, I believe there's a real potential for Trump among ambitious and aspirational black younger men.
Do you think that there's a sort of an identification of them? I mean, even though Trump obviously inherited a big fortune and made it bigger, you know, that he's got that hustle, he's got that personality. They know him from the show where The Apprentice and all of this, and that they identify with that entrepreneurial spirit, that it's more about the business side of things, the hustle, if you will, rather than the politics.
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, the untold story of The Apprentice, Trump show, was that the Q rating, which is basically what a personality has to appeal to various groups, his Q rating for that show was much higher among black and Hispanic viewers than it was among whites. Now, some of that tailed away after all of the criticism of him and some of his rhetorical missteps, but he was very, very popular with minority viewers. And that some of that carries over even after all these years to the current polls that he's enjoying.
And yet Joe Biden himself, he doesn't really seem to be, none of the messaging about this seems to be getting through to him. I want you to have a look at Joe Biden here being confronted about this by a reporter, and I want your reaction to his take on this. Have a look at this.
Why do you think it is that you're trailing Trump in all these swing state polls?
Because you don't read the polls. I'll forgive. There are 10 polls. 8 of them I'm beating him in those states. 8 of them. You guys only do 2. CNN and New York Times. Check it out. Check it out. We'll get you a copy of all those polls.
What did you make of that? I mean, he's going on about the crosstabs, I guess, but does Joe Biden understand the problem that he's got, or is he getting angry because he knows he's got a problem?
It's a combination. I question whether his staff shows him all of the polls that he thinks he sees. And I question whether or not when they guide him through the interpretation of those polls, that they leave some of the bad news on the cutting room floor, perhaps. So Joe Biden believes what Joe Biden wants to believe. It's that simple.
Fair enough. And finally, I want to talk about what's happened in my own home state of New York. There's been one of those elections that we talked about. And it's a small election, and yet quite telling. For the first time in 12 years, Suffolk County on Long Island is going to have a Republican executive. This is solidly Democratic, suburban New York State on the heels of Governor Hochul almost losing or having a much closer race than she should have. Is there a problem now for the Democrats in some of these suburban places that would normally have been very professional, very Democratic, and they're seeing what's happening, I guess, in their nearby metropolises and saying, you know what, we just can't deal with Democrats anymore?
Well, it's two stories. There are two kinds of suburbs around New York City. There's the Tony, leafy suburbs of Westchester County, think of Scarsdale, and then there's the more middle-class, sprawling suburbs of Long Island. Democrats continue to do well, and in fact are doing better than ever in Westchester because the rich increasingly vote Democratic, whereas the middle class, the struggling middle class that is paying the bills and sees crime and disorder in New York City and even in their own neighborhoods, is moving to the Republicans. Long Island used to be Republican, then it moved to be more mixed and neutral, and now it's clearly moving in a Republican direction based on the disorder that they witness in the state.
John Fund, thanks so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you here on the U.S. Report.
Thank you.
Well, Republican rivals faced off for the third GOP primary debate this week. Donald Trump once again skipped the event, but that didn't stop the candidates from clashing. Presidential hopeful Vivek Ramaswamy turned up the heat from the start.
Why should you be the nominee and not the former president?
I think there's something deeper going on in the Republican Party here, and I am upset about what happened last night. We've become a party of losers at the end of the day. It is a cancer to the Republican establishment. Let's speak the truth. I mean, since Ronna McDaniel took over as chairwoman of the RNC in 2017, we have lost 2018, 2020, 2022, no red wave that never came. We got trounced last night in 2023. And I think that we have to have accountability in our party.
Somebody get the Savlon. Joining me to discuss this and more is former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer. Sean, thanks for joining us. What did you make of the debate, and in particular, Vivek Ramaswamy's absolute carpet bombing of the GOP leadership there?
So I think that with respect to Vivek's sort of carpet bombing, as you put it, he probably got some viral clips. I think he did very well online. I think the base that is already with him probably, not just probably, guaranteed applauded him. I don't think he moved the needle, though. Look, this is all about Iowa right now. I've said this all day today, that the big winner today is Iowa. If you can't get out of Iowa, if you can't defeat Donald Trump in Iowa, the game is over. I used to say the early states, but it's coalesced. It's now literally all about Iowa. Last night, I don't see anyone who moved the needle significantly to affect the caucus goers in Iowa. And just to be clear, every one of these candidates has staked their flag there and saying, if I don't do well in Iowa, I'm out, right? Trump is up right now. The latest poll in Iowa, 43. The next closest two people are Haley and DeSantis at 16. Look, I will say this on a positive note. That was probably the most substantive debate that we've had so far. I got to hear some good issues. I got to hear how these candidates differ from each other on everything from national security to Ukraine funding to TikTok. There was some good substantive discussion last night. I will give credit to that. But did it matter? And the answer is no.
Well, so then what kind of game then is somebody like, say, Vivek Ramaswamy playing here when he just comes out and does this very combative routine? Now, as you say, it's really entertaining to watch. The grabs are fantastic. You know, like my Twitter was blowing up with them yesterday. But I'll tell you what, you've got to wonder, where does this guy go? Does he want a spot in a Trump administration? What does he think? Because he's an interesting guy, he's a smart guy, but he's kind of all over the map, and he's also been accused of being, you know, a bit of a weather vane with wherever a certain segment of the GOP is.
That's right. Look, I think he might be the only person that is actually looking for a spot in a Trump administration. No one else on that. Everyone keeps saying, is this an audition for vice president? You tell me, after what you saw the last couple debates, you think Donald Trump wants Chris Christie or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley? Absolutely not. And I don't think that they share that feeling. I don't think they disagree with that feeling. They don't want to be part of a Trump administration. Vivek might be different. But at the end of the day, here's what I'll tell you. Nobody runs for president to be something else. I think Vivek thinks, for those folks who follow NASCAR, I think he's drafting. His idea is, I'm going to talk nice about the former president, his base, the policies he supported, in the hope that by saying I'm Trump without the lawsuits, that if Trump were to have some kind of stumble or fall, he would be the legitimate heir apparent. That's what he's doing. You notice he's the only one that's not going after Trump. He's actually saying, I want to be like Trump. I just don't have the baggage and the lawsuits.
Now, who else, though, to get beyond Vivek, who else stuck out for you? Who were the winners of this debate, and what were the interesting things that came out? I thought, you mentioned Chris Christie before, I thought what he had to say about TikTok was absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I think what he said about TikTok was great. I think what he said about the 300-ship Navy, that question from Hugh Hewitt, I don't think it was necessarily, I know Hugh was looking for a number in that question, but how Christie handled that issue was really smart. He talked about the strategic need of submarines in the Indo-Pacific as a check against China and any aggression they might have towards Taiwan. That was brilliantly answered. I just think that he has cast his die already. People they think he is on a kamikaze mission to go after Trump. That being said, I think if Ron DeSantis had not gotten the endorsement of the very popular governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, then everybody this morning would have been talking about the performance of Nikki Haley and whether she is the person that everyone needs to coalesce around.
Talk us through that, because what stuck out for you about Nikki Haley's performance?
I think she just sounded, how she talked about national security, she sounded presidential. I think people wanted to talk, wanted somebody serious. She talked about the reality of addressing the issue of abortion and life in a way that is reasonable and strategically smart, right? To say that you want a 15-week ban, but know that you can't get it through the United States Senate is misleading at best. And Nikki, I think, got up there and talked in a very strategically smart way, a way that for a lot of donors and never Trumpers, they said, I could take that. I could be part of that. She has the resume as a governor and a former UN ambassador to make people feel at ease that she's ready to step into the presidency. I think the way and the tone that she talks is something that a lot of people are looking for. So right now, what we're seeing isn't so much that much of a difference in policy. It's a different in tone and style that people are yearning for. They love the Trump policies. They love the Trump achievements. But for a lot of people, they say, I want Trump without the baggage. I want Trump without the attacks.
Right. And of course, at the same time this whole debate was going on, Donald Trump himself was holding a rally down the road from the debate, and he gathered quite the crowd. Now, do you reckon that this strategy that he has of just basically saying, oh, no, I'm going to be the candidate and not showing up for the debate, this is doing well, obviously, for him among Republicans, but do you think that this could actually be backfiring against him in the general election if people think that he's just too much playing to this one particular MAGA base?
No, I think, look, you saw those polls that came out over the weekend from the New York Times, Siena College. They showed Trump in every battleground state leading, save Wisconsin, where he's within the margin of error. And remember, we don't run national primaries and we don't run national elections here. They're state run. We get electoral college votes. And right now, Donald Trump, if you do the math, would have over 300 electoral votes. You only need 270 to win. My point in this is that he understands what it takes to run against Joe Biden. He's got a plan. He's executing a message that works. Look, I think there's a big difference between not debating in a primary, which frankly makes sense for him strategically. These other people are, anywhere nationally to even in the key battleground, key early primary states, anywhere to the low teens. Trump's like, hey, I'm a former president that's winning by a lot. I don't need to put myself on the level of you so that you can just use me as a verbal punching bag for 50 minutes. I think that's smart. Trump himself has said that he looks forward to debating Biden, and it would be a very different scenario in a general election.
And that will be quite the debate. I can't wait to watch that. But Sean, before we let you go, this impeachment inquiry against Joe Biden is not going away despite everything else happening in the world. Yeah. And just hours ago, subpoenas were dropped. They've been dropped on Hunter and others, but now also on 3 of Hunter's business associates, a New York City art gallery owner, a Delaware donor, and 2 associates of Joe's brother, Jim Biden. Are we starting to see the outlines of where the case against the Bidens is going? And what impact, Sean, very quickly, do you think it's going to have on the general election?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question. Republicans have got Hunter Biden dead to right, and no one, I think, is out there defending him. He's a scumbag. He's evaded taxes. He's pled guilty before to a lot of charges. We know that. But the question is, can you tie him or his brother Jay or Joe's brother James back to Joe Biden? That's been what the Republican Party, the Republicans in Congress are trying to do, and I think, frankly, have to do if they want to change this from, this is, you go back to Billy Carter, to Roger Clinton. There were a lot of people around politicians who've been in the presidency who have been unsavory. But there's a difference between that and actually the president himself being compromised. Republicans, through this impeachment inquiry, are trying to make it clear that it does go to Joe Biden. I think these checks that they're finding, and I think the subpoenas that they've cast, that's what they're going for on that. And I've talked about it. I have a podcast, The Sean Spicer Show, where I've had several guests on, several of these members of Congress, to talk about what they're doing. Ron Johnson was just on the other day. He's been a leader in the Senate. What they're doing, how they're doing it. And I think this tracing the money, which is what you're getting at, is going to be crucial if they really want to make that case.
Sean Spicer, thank you so much. And Billy Carter, there's a name from the past. Go have yourself a Billy beer. Thank you so much for your time tonight on the U.S. Report. Now, big legal week for Donald Trump, with judges and prosecutors fighting to get him on all fronts. And we'll be talking about that next with trial attorney Robert Barnes. But before we do, we also know that, of course, Donald Trump did not attend the latest GOP debate. But that doesn't mean his team wasn't out there doing their own brand of pot stirring. Check out the way Team Trump previewed the big event.
Ron DeSantis, High Heels University.
Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump Fan Club.
Nikki Birdbrain Haley, Bush War Crime Institute.
Tim Scott, I'm just happy to be here. Chris Christie, Golden Corral State.
Ouch! Robert Barnes after the break. Welcome back to the program. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by trial lawyer Robert Barnes, who will tell us all about the latest efforts of the Get Trump campaign playing out in the courts. But before we get to all that, we know the world is a dangerous place. And I wanted to share with you a little evidence that maybe, just maybe, some people in the Pentagon are starting to wake up to this. I mean, China is getting ever more aggressive around Taiwan. We all know what is going on in the Middle East. And things have gotten so dicey in Ukraine that Vladimir Zelensky wound up having to spend a day with U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. War really is hell. Amidst these global tensions, the U.S. Army has unveiled a new recruitment ad, one that actually focuses on, doing Army stuff. Have a look.
Stand up!
Well, great. It's a far cry from the last U.S. Army recruiting campaign. The one with the girl with two mommies decides to be a soldier as part of some personal enrichment journey. And it's got more than a few people thinking, gosh, if they're actually serious about soldiering now, are they worried about an actual war? But I tell you what, color me skeptical here. The U.S. Army and so many other institutions have spent the last 2 decades running down the profession of military service with woke nightmares, like this pup play soldier and General Milley banging on about white rage. Author Peachy Keenan noted the contrast too, saying on Twitter, the U.S. Army's new recruitment ad is so cynical. After 15 years of relentless progressive brainwashing and doing a literal stand down to root out extremists, i.e. white conservatives, they are now facing an existential recruiting crisis and must return again to seducing the children of said extremists into fighting for their country. Indeed, and it is a crisis, all right. I just hope that it is not too late to fix it. No shortage of drama out of Donald Trump's civil trial in New York this week after he and Ivana took to the witness box, maintaining their innocence. The case, brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, alleges Donald Trump's annual statements of financial condition routinely contained fraudulent and inflated figures designed to get better deals on loans and insurance. Joining me to discuss this now is trial lawyer Robert Barnes. Robert Barnes, thank you so much for joining us. Take us through what is going on here, because we've talked about this case before on this show. I don't think anybody has ever really been prosecuted for what Trump is being accused of. Now Trump's children are being dragged into it. How is this not just a gigantic witch hunt by a politically motivated prosecutor and a politically motivated judge?
It's one of the most selective prosecutions that's ever occurred in the United States. And it's the most unusual fraud case because the judge has ruled that fraud is actually irrelevant to the case, which the judge had to rule in terms of materiality because there was no fraud. As President Trump has identified repeatedly, he paid back all the loans. All the lawyers who looked at this didn't have a problem with it. All the economists who looked at it didn't have a problem with it. All the appraisers who looked at it didn't have a problem with it. All the banks, some of the most sophisticated banks in the world were involved in lending money to President Trump, didn't have a problem with it. The big insurance companies that gave him the insurance deals that the Attorney General says somehow were too generous, they didn't have any problem with it, and they're some of the biggest insurance companies in the world. And the reason is because there was no fraud. So you've got a fake case from a judge who's embarrassing the rule of law in America by a prosecutor who has flagrantly thrown aside First Amendment rights of the president to do this selective prosecution in what is an ongoing show trial that is mostly a show of what is embarrassing to the status of the rule of law in America to the global audience.
And, I mean, we know now about the judge, too, that his wife has been out on social media posting all sorts of stuff about Trump. They've been trying to gag Trump also from talking about the case. Now, what are the dangers, though, because I've been reading about this, that they decide to hold Trump on contempt. Is this going to become this real sort of legal brinksmanship where somebody actually thinks they've got a chance to throw Donald Trump in the clink for contempt over violating a gag order, which, as you say, would be unconstitutional, likely against the First Amendment? How dangerous is this actually getting, A, for Trump, and B, Robert, for the democratic process and the rule of law?
It's getting dangerous to a level we've never seen before at both levels, not only for President Trump, but for the American people and our constitutional republic. Because what we're witnessing is a judge who's just abusing his power. It's a judge who shouldn't even be presiding over the case. It should have been assigned to the commercial division out of New York. It's a case the federal courts never should have allowed to go forward because the Attorney General said she was going to target Trump. It was the old Beria line to Stalin, show me the man, I'll find you the crime. She said, well, elect me and I'll harass Donald Trump into oblivion. And that's what she did. That should have been stopped by the federal courts at the inception. And now you have a judge who's embarrassed by the partisan corruption of his court, the partisan corruption of his staff, the partisan corruption of the prosecutor, all being exposed in what is fundamentally a fake case. And so what's he doing? He's gagging the president. He's gagging the lawyers. He's telling the lawyers they can't even file motions in court. He's threatening to imprison and jail President Trump. He's fining the president for exposing this fraud. I haven't seen a show trial like this since the Soviet Union, and that's what we're witnessing in live time in New York City.
Well, Robert, what are the chances then that this winds up backfiring spectacularly on the Democrats and the people who are running this and presumably pulling the strings behind the scenes here, insofar as, the American people look at this and whether or not they're pro-Trump or not? And this is something that I have said very often on this show when I've talked about this, that you do not have to like Donald Trump or his policies to be alarmed about what's happening here. Is this part of the reason why we're starting to see Trump really moving further ahead, especially with independents in the polls?
No doubt. You're seeing the president have leads he has never had. He didn't have in 2015 or 2016, didn't have in 2020. He's leading across the board in all the key swing states. He has an edge in polls that have historically been hostile to him. The New York Times historically underrated President Trump's performance by 6 to 7 points, and they're saying he's winning by 4 to 5 points, sometimes 10 points in these key swing states. Why? Because the American people see through this. The ordinary people are simple. They're like, okay, who did President Trump harm? And nobody can give him an answer. There's no victim. The president didn't harm the banks, didn't harm the insurance company, didn't harm the government, didn't harm his employees. In fact, he helped them all. So it's like, why is there a lawsuit against him? Why are they trying to bankrupt him? Why are they trying to jail him? And if there's no corruption in the court system, why is the court system saying he can't talk about it? Why are they trying to gag him? Why are they trying to fine him? Why are they trying to jail him? If the ordinary person in America is seeing through this, the question at the end of it is, does the judicial system have any respect left in the United States amongst the ordinary American? You know how bad it is when Eric Holder's even going around saying, maybe this looks a little bad.
Eric Holder, absolutely. Now, on the other side of the ledger, of course, we've got a House committee now issuing subpoenas not just to Hunter and James Biden, but to a whole swag of Biden family associates, an art gallery dealer. I presume this is over Hunter's finger paintings that sold for suspiciously high amounts of money to people who may or may not have wanted something from the Biden family. Where does this all wind up landing, in your opinion? And do you think that there's more prima facie evidence here as a lawyer of wrongdoing by the Bidens than by the Trumps?
There's no doubt about it. Everything they've accused Trump of is what the Biden family is actually guilty of. You know, they said if you elect Trump, Trump's going to lead us into World War III. Biden's trying every means to lead us into World War III. They said if you can't trust Trump and his family because they're doing secret deals with foreign governments to enrich themselves. Biden was describing himself, not President Trump. And we're seeing that in live time. I mean, they put President Trump under microscopic inquiry, and all they can come up with is fake cases. And by contrast, it was an open secret when President Biden was Vice President Biden. There were people who approached my clients saying that for the right donation to the right Biden family member, magical things could happen to their cases involving the Department of Justice. So this has been kind of an open secret in Washington that Biden's entire family sold access to him to enrich him and the entire family and build his political machine. And it's just about time we finally start exposing it at a meaningful level in the House of Representatives. And I think the American people are going to be shocked at the scale, scope, and severity of the corruption of the Biden family.
Robert Barnes, we're going to have to leave it there, but we're going to come back to you again and talk about that scale of corruption as it emerges, if it emerges, in the weeks and months ahead. Robert Barnes, thank you so much for your time. Now, don't go anywhere, because in a moment, I'm going to be joined by Blaze TV host Sara Gonzales, who will tell us about all the crazy lengths the Democrats went to this week to defend one of their anti-Semitic congressional colleagues. But first, I want to give some credit to someone who I've been pretty hard on in the past, and not without reason. John Fetterman, the lurch-like senator from Pennsylvania. But you know what? Have a look at this. He's plastered his office on Capitol Hill with posters of the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th. Fetterman says they're staying up until they're all home safe. And I say, good on you, Senator. And when I'm next in Canberra, I'm going to look around and see if any of your Labour counterparts in Australia have done the same thing. Sara Gonzales on the Rashida Tlaib censure motion after the break. Welcome back to the program. A lot more to get through tonight, so let's waste no time. Very pleased to be joined now by Blaze TV host Sara Gonzales to talk about a number of things, including the House of Representatives, which passed a resolution to censure Democrat Rashida Tlaib after anti-Israel comments, including the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Now, anybody who's ever looked at a map knows what that means. But here's Rashida Tlaib defending, or I should say gaslighting us about what she had to say.
I want you to explain, what you mean by it and why you used it or why you included it in the video.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm asking my colleagues, don't distort the words of my residents. Many people in this movement for human rights for Palestinians have always centered around coexistence.
Sara Gonzales, what do we make of that defense?
Obviously, she's lying. She's mad that she got caught and she doesn't know what else to say. I think for so long, she and the other members of the squad have preyed upon a lot of Americans, unfortunately, a lot of Americans who just don't know enough to understand what that phrase actually means. Obviously, as you pointed out, if you look at a map, that means the elimination of Israel, and that means the elimination of Israelis. So look, It was nice to see some sort of action. Obviously, a censure is just kind of a sternly worded letter to the manager. But this cannot be tolerated in Congress. And certainly, we need to take a look at the members of Congress that we're electing and whether or not they have allegiances to our country or to another one.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because 184 Democrats actually voted with her, which I found absolutely unbelievable. Have a listen here to Democrat Ilhan Omar.
What is true here is that every single one of them has not acknowledged the fact that Palestinians are dying in the tens of thousands, but will continue to say it is us who are not acknowledging humanity.
Now, worthy of an Oscar performance, I guess, but do the Democrats have an anti-Semitism problem here?
Yes, they do. Absolutely. And on top of that, I would add that it's something that's been brewing for a while that I think a lot of Democrats, it was very easy for them to ignore and move on to something else. Now, since the October 7th terror attack on Israel from Hamas, a lot of Democrats have been faced to, with all of this anti-Semitism. You even had Jake Tapper on CNN right after the attack going, wow, is the Democrat Party really this anti-Semitic? Yeah, Jake, it is. And it has been for a really long time. You guys have been, associating with these people and you just didn't realize it. It took something as horrific as this terror attack for all of these, these people to show their true colors and for the Democrats to go, hold on, I think we may have a problem in this party.
Well, I mean, Sarah, it seems like it's not just among the elected officials. It seems like with an awful lot of people on the left out on the streets, not just people of Palestinian or Arab background, but just, people who I guess have been through the university system and been infected with this sort of, loony left anti-Semitic rage. Very sad story out of California where a 69-year-old Jewish man was killed during an altercation with pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Police say Paul Kessler fell backwards, hit his head on the sidewalk, with reports that he was allegedly pushed by another demonstrator. But have a look at this video that was taken at the protest just before the altercation in which Mr. Kessler died.
That's what the tape's for. Hitler didn't want you. Hitler didn't want you. Hitler should have smashed you.
They're just horrific things being chanted there. What is happening on the streets? I also saw some horrific video of people having a brawl outside the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles. Tell us what is happening on the streets here. This seems very dangerous. That's very almost 1930s vibe about it, Sarah.
It does. It absolutely does. And I think that really it bears mentioning, for a long time, these indoctrination camps that we call education systems, particularly the higher education system, has chosen to, rewrite history, to reshape history the way that they want it to be taught. And this, I think, is a direct result of that. You have all of these demonstrators marching down the streets, yelling from the rivers to the sea, Palestine will be free, without actually knowing what they're talking about. I saw a video today that there were two protesters, and they were, of course, pro-Palestinian protesters. And someone asked them what they thought about the October 7th terror attack of Hamas on Israel. And they said, I don't think that there was one. They didn't even know that there was an attack that started on October 7th on Israel. So you're dealing with a lot of people who are being taught garbage. And, they have the same, that saying, garbage in, garbage out. And I think that that's what you're seeing here, is that people are being brainwashed into rewriting history, into thinking that, that Israel has been the oppressor for so long, and all of these half-truths. And this is a direct result of that. This is part of the woke ideology that people are learning when they go to these higher education systems. They're getting amped up. They go to the streets, tensions get heated, and people end up dying.
And they wind up also in the newsrooms around the United States, because they wind up writing headlines like "Man dies after suffering head injury" or "Jewish man dies after altercation," and all these very sort of passive voice ways of covering this terrible incident, where you just know that if the shoes were on the other foot here, if a Muslim protester was killed by Jewish protesters, I suspect we might be hearing the words national conversation a bit more.
Yeah, you know, it's also fascinating because anytime the left and the mainstream media, which is obviously redundant because the mainstream media is the left, but anytime that they have any opportunity to tie some person on the right to Nick Fuentes or to some, you know, anti-Semitic person, they never hesitate to do so. They always make a big, huge deal about it, and everyone has to end up disavowing everyone involved, and it becomes some big, huge scene because it's all the headlines say. Now, all of a sudden, when the shoe's on the other foot and you actually have Hamas attacking, you know, doing horrific things to infants and women in the streets of Israel. Now, all of a sudden, the mainstream media wants to go easy on anything anti-Semitic and terror attacks. Like, look, some of the positives, I'll say, at least, of social media platforms, of X, of Facebook, of things like that, is that people can at least see the real truth. People can at least call these mainstream media outlets out on their garbage because they see that that's, you know what, this Jewish guy didn't actually magically just bump his head and die. It was a little more than that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating, too, because the social media, I was just about to say that, I've just been noticing there's videos now that the New York Times is being, its lobby is being occupied in New York by pro-Palestinian demonstrators who are accusing it of being too pro-Israel, which I think is absolutely hilarious. But speaking of viral videos on social media, this next video has gone viral, and it shows just how unhinged those on the radical left can be. This is a vision of a man who had a bone to pick with a Republican volunteer who was handing out how-to-vote cards at his local polling place this week. I'm going to let this video speak for itself.
You might as well have been walking up to my head on the way to the polling station, putting a gun to my head, and trying to tell me not to vote. You expect me not to take that personally? You try to overthrow elections with violence, and then you're out here among decent people. You try to steal my vote next year, I'm gonna remember you personally.
Sarah Gonzalez, the tolerant, level-headed left strikes again, hey?
Oh, yeah. They're all about acceptance and inclusion, except when you're someone who wants, I don't know, less government and lower taxes. I will say, though, if people go and watch online the end of the clip, the most perfect representation of this man was that he walked over to, of course, his Prius and left in his Prius. But of course, you know, these people are being amped up by the mainstream media. You know, they actually think that we're all trying to overthrow the government. It's what they're being spoon-fed, and they're too mentally ill to know anything different. It's really sad and scary.
And of course, Sarah, it's them who are the ones who are actually doing the questioning of elections. Sarah Gonzalez, we're going to have to leave it there. Now, Only in America is coming up in a moment, but first, do you ever get the feeling you're being watched? I do right now because, well, I'm on your TV. But what about other people, like folks who lived along the train line when Joe Biden was commuting by Amtrak?
These are jobs for folks I thought about as I take that train home. You know the park, guys, you get outside of Baltimore, just before you get into Baltimore, you can look out the window and you're going through basically the neighborhood. And I always used to sit there, I mean it, coming home, and look out and see people sitting at the kitchen tables. Literally, you could see them right along the track. And wondering, what are they thinking about? What are they, what's on their minds?
What are they thinking? Hey, Mabel, there's some creepy guy staring in our kitchen window. Only in America is next. Welcome back to the program. And now it's time for a little segment we like to call Only in America. Now, we all know that the U.S. Senate is no country for young men. In fact, it's become more of God's waiting room than even Florida. And as this touching video from our friends at the Babylon Bee suggests, the Senate is also where an increasing number of families are sending older relatives when they might, you know, need a little more help.
Things happen.
You get confused, you forget where you are.
You fall down.
You need to go someplace where they can take care of you.
Where people your age go.
I think it's time for you to run for U.S. Senate.
No! How can you do this to me? I still have a lot of good years left.
Of course you do, Grandpa. But just think, you'll be with people your own age.
You'll have staff. They can take really good care of you. You know, they can whisper in your ear how to vote, you know? Just say aye.
Hi. and you don't even have to serve out the full 6-year term. I mean, in 4 years, you'll be 96. You could run for president.
I understand your concern, but I'm fine. Really, I'm...
Grandpa?
Hey.
Grandpa, are you
Grandpa?
okay?
Yeah, he's just McConnelling again.
I never know what to do.
You just have to wait it out. He's gonna come back any second.
What? What are you staring at?
It happened again, Grandpa.
What?
You McConnell.
I didn't McConnell. Maybe you McConnell.
We didn't McConnell, Grandpa. We were sitting here talking to each other. You can't talk to each other when you're McConnelling.
Hi there. My name is... whatever, unimportant. What's important is I am running for Senate and I need your... Hey. What? Hi there. My name is Grandpa.
He's got my vote. That's all the time we have for this week. See you next time. And remember, vote one Grandpa for a better, whatever. Bye-bye.